Okay, now playing California Triathlon Soup.
Welcome to another episode of California Triathlon Soup. And this week we are very lucky to have guest Dave Scott, six-time Ironman World Champion, with us out of Colorado. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Tom. It's nice to be here on your show.
Well, this is the third show, and we like to joke that there are probably at least 24 people who stumble across it randomly. So of all the things you do this year, we're thinking this will be the least listened to thing. So feel free to make as many mistakes as you want to.
I'll try to let it flow smoothly, but fire away. We'll see how we do, both of us.
Well, no worries. Well, we wanted to, a couple weeks ago, we put out a question to our 4,300 members, and we wanted to start off right away, just kind of getting some of those questions to you. What most folks may or may not know is that you have been a content machine over the last few years, pumping out training and nutritional advice. And sure enough, most of the questions we got were there. So one of the things that just kind of start off with the question is, when you are looking to do your training, this is from David. He had 3 questions. So what attracted you to become a triathlete? What one tip can you provide to make us better, more efficient triathletes in our training? And then the last one is, what one tip is there to overcome the mental aspects of being a triathlete? And I know that's a lot, but maybe you could start talking about that.
Well, I'll start from the top. Why did I become a triathlete? When I first started, the word wasn't around. The events weren't called triathlon. They were just called sort of a mixed event. So the vernacular in triathlon wasn't in constant cement. But I just found it intriguing. I had initially a swimming and water polo background. That's what I did in high school and college, and ironically, my swim became my weakest of the 3. And I found that I was able to pick up running, even though my running, it looks so unsightly. There were times when I could run pretty efficiently, and I seemed to do okay on the bike. So the first events that I ever kind of fell into outside of that swimming realm were swim run events, a swim bike event. There was an event in Foster City, south of San Francisco, in 1976. That was a swim run event, and I actually thought I'd won the event. And there was this young kid that was there. I didn't even see him, and they said, "Oh, this guy Scott Molina won the event." And Scott was 15 years old at the time. I think we're about 7 years different, so I was 22. So it goes way back. I was intrigued by it. I seemed to have a good battery to go longer. And when I first heard about the Ironman race in 78, I had already done the Waikiki rough water swim, which is obviously the first leg of Ironman. I had competed in a couple of short triathlons. I'll back up a little bit. 76 was my first triathlon in San Francisco. Freezing cold water, no wetsuits. The order was about a 15K. It wasn't 15K, somewhere in that realm. No aid stations, no police, no one to monitor or anything. You put your bikes on the ground, and we started off with this 15K bike, put our bikes back down on the ground, and then the run was second, about 4 miles, and then we jumped in the bay. This was middle of November, right near around Thanksgiving, and I think the water was 57 or 56 degrees Fahrenheit then. So that one did intrigue me. I froze to death, but I was kind of used to doing open water swims. Anyway, a long-winded answer. I kind of like the unknown in the event, and also the third question that you had, David, was about the mental part of it. I like the mental element of it. I could see my competitors. I didn't really have competitors, but I could see my fellow mates that were racing these first events, and I could see them start to wilt a little bit. And I thought, well, are they getting tired, or they just had mentally they had enough of this? And so I kind of relished that mental aptitude. So the why part, it was very intriguing. The mental part, which was your third question, I think a lot of people wrestle with the enormity of the race, whether they're doing a 70.3 race or they're graduating up to an Ironman race or even their first one, which might be a sprint. And they think about possibly the sum of that total time that they're going to be exercising, and it seems overwhelming. I've always told people to have many mini races within the race and always segment that race. So if you have kind of a mental roadmap of the race itself, and you can look at maybe the tricky parts or a sharp turn or a good climb or a windy section or whatever it may be, and they don't have to be equidistant, then you've got this mental roadmap, and that allows you to make the event palatable in your mind. So, people have asked me, well, Ironman's a long day. And I said, no, it goes by real fast. It's always fast. And I'm not saying that arrogantly. Well, I did it 8 hours something and someone else did 16 hours. But I think if you break it up into pieces, it'll allow you to flow during that event and again, not think of the sum of the long day that you're doing. You asked for a tip. Well, that was one that I just gave you, but I'm not really sure specifically on the tip part of it. I think a lot of people wrestle with more is better. And they're always thinking, gee, if I go longer, I'm going to be better at this game. And there's a real false notion in that physiologically, just the adaptive nature of the sport. People think if I'm going to get better, I develop better aerobic economy. And I've always kind of said, what if I could take a look at your insides when you start? I'm going to chop you open. I know this sounds pretty gruesome. And I'm going to take a look at your blood volume and your oxidative enzymes and your capillary density and your mitochondria, your energy organelles. Do they all improve with more distance? And no, they don't. They actually can decline, particularly as you start doing longer distance and you do it kind of hard all the time. So we're better off integrating shorter segments, higher intensity, and metabolically, it's better for your health. It's better for aging. And in the early years, there was a lot of experimenting. And anyway, that tip, I think, is don't always think when you have more time, go longer. Jack up your intensity a little bit, and it'll pay off in the race. Okay, that was a long-winded answer. I won't be as long as on the other ones, Tom.
No, that was great. In fact, as part of doing a little bit of research on your first, races, was it John Collins that convinced you to do the first 140.6?
John wasn't the guy who came up with the flyer. Again, I mentioned I was in Hawaii and had actually won the Waikiki Rough Water Swim. The talent level in that race now is just ferocious. But back in the 70s, I was able to win a couple of the years. He came up to me after the event was held for the first time in 1978. And, I read this flyer, and I've told this story many, many times. I thought when I saw this 2.4 and 112 miles, 26-mile run, that it was over 3 days. And I was just completely mystified that, people did this in one day, but also intrigued by it. And I was corrected on it. And of course, I had already done a few triathlons and we didn't have a name for them in 76 and 77. So I thought, wow, these people are doing this Ironman race. I've got to do this thing.
If you had from a goal point of view, if they had said it was a 3-day event, or did it intrigue you that it was a 1-day event? Did it kind of make you more interested that it was a 1-day event?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole mental part of it was, people survived this, and my attitude was it wasn't a survival. It was a race because there were so many unknowns. So why not go as hard as I can? Maybe I can finish before dinner. I always thought it was going to be a race, and I think if it was just a 3-day event, I'm 2.4 miles of swimming. I had done that hundreds and hundreds of times, if not 1,000 times in swim workouts. And when I actually heard about the event, I thought, well, maybe I should try to do a mock triathlon at home. And so I didn't do it in quite the order that it is, swim, bike, run, but I did a 100-mile century ride and did it as hard as I could. And of course, we didn't know anything about fuel or hydration. And then I kind of charted out a 20-mile run. And my girlfriend at the time, I think she was irritated with me because I probably barked at her at one time, and she sort of disappeared in the run. So I did the 20-mile run without any beverage at all. And then once I finished the 20-mile run, I said, well, I'm going to go over to the pool. And I was coaching at the time, so I opened up the pool, and I ended up swimming 5,000, which was kind of excessive, but I've been excessive at times. So I did that big, long day thinking, well, I can do this Ironman thing. That wasn't that tough. But and I did my first marathon in September of 79 and ended up going to Oahu, where it was held the first 3 years in January of 1980. So, I was naive and green like everyone else, but I did want to race it.
Yeah, I've never, it's funny, the doing the bike run swim. I can imagine, I'm just thinking about a long course race. It's 9 or 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night, and people are starting to get into their swim, and there's cramping. I mean, you see the cramping on a run course. I can't even imagine what that would look like if they had kept that order. I guess that maybe that's why they switched it around. Who knows?
I think it was a very good idea. We actually held a race here in 1981, and I say here when I used to live in Davis, California, and I was aware of this guy down in San Diego, Scott Tinley, and Scott Tinley was coming up there, and I was kind of helping out with the race, so I didn't race. I had won Ironman in 1980, but now Scott Tinley, who was a real athlete, was coming to do the event. It happened to be a very cold day in September in Davis, and the swim was on the end. And Scott was a pretty wispy, willowy guy, like he always was, lean guy. And I think he was one of many of the athletes when they got to the swim. Again, no wetsuits, water's in the high 60s. He was climbing up the vegetation on these nice lots that were lining the lake because, well, I think Scott had a really bad calf cramp along with a lot of his competitors. So they did decide to switch it around. That was probably a good idea.
Well, one of the things that that you have been a big proponent of is not the concept of more training is always better. So you take a different approach, higher quality, maybe higher intensity, shorter sessions. We look at having athletes have something that's sustainable. So if you were to look at an athlete who was able to do an Olympic during the year, maybe ramp up to a 70.3 once a year, what would a week be like in terms of hours? I mean, athletes are different. You've got 3 disciplines. You've got all the stuff with core and, keeping flexible. When you coach somebody, and for the record, we'll have all the links to Dave's coaching services on the podcast. When you coach somebody and you say, hey, I work 40, 45, 50 hours a week, but I want to do an Olympic, I want to do really well, what would that week look like?
Well, I think the first thing is everyone's got to look at that 45 or 50 hour work week and put down on a daily basis what's reasonable that I can exercise during this time. That doesn't mean to be excessive, but what can I do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? So now you have a grid, and you can say, well, gee, I've got an hour and a half on Monday. I've got 40 minutes on Tuesday. And then the second part is to see, well, if I'm going to do all 3 of these disciplines, and you better do it, can you get in 3 disciplines in each week? So 3 bikes, 3 runs, and 3 swims. And I have always mentioned this, and even way back when in the early 80s, I said, you better be doing some strength training. And I've kind of added, you need to make sure that you're maintaining the mobility in your shoulders, your middle of your back, your thoracic spine, your hips. So those are the big 3 areas, and people have a tendency to lose those in this sport, and they lose them with the aging. So you've got to include some mobility exercises and simultaneously keep the flexibility. That's a good trade-off if you can do those big 3 words, mobility, stretching, and strength, and you do that twice a week. But I think people can sit down at night, every single night, and do some form of those 3. And so I generally have people write that down on the calendar, but not necessarily denote the days unless they've got they need to go to the gym to do it, so they're around other people, and I get that. I think when we look at total time on this, it certainly helps an athlete if they're going to be jumping up to Olympic distance and never done anything close to that distance and or 70.3. that they actually, in those two distances, actually go the distance. I probably should swim a 1,500 straight, because that swim is that's what it is in the Olympic distance. I probably should go, roughly 2,000 for a 70.3 race. The run is not that critical. And I think a lot of people, when they get extra time on the run, biomechanically, they're not as efficient. So I've had a lot of runners do very well on race day, never have run the distance, but are very confident running somewhere between 10 and 11 miles. So you're taking off 20 to 25% of the total distance on the run. The bike is fairly easy, 90K or 56 miles. I think, yes, that's a good idea. Tom, your question on total time, there's a lot of athletes that have done extremely well on anywhere between about 10 to 12 and a half hours a week. So you really got to be finite with your program. If you have 9 sessions per week and you're doing a little bit of strength training, that's in your hourly allotment. A lot of those sessions, you've got to pare them down. They might be 30 to 40-minute sessions, and that's it. And that some will add up pretty darn quickly. I've had Ironman athletes do very well on 12 to 16 hours a week. Time, again, is not that vital, but it obviously varies with each athlete and what their background is. When athletes have asked me, should I go longer on the weekend and skip my mobility, stretching, and strength? I'm just going to skip it entirely. I'm only doing it once a week. I say, no, don't do that. Go shorter and do both. So I'm really steadfast on this. And I think, the single biggest cursor for aging is loss of lean muscle mass. And you see a lot of athletes that are in the sport, both genders, that are, what I term are skinny fat. We see them, they look very thin, but they've lost their muscle mass, and so they've whittled their body down, and consequently they're very vulnerable for injury. But they're also, their performance parameters are going to be negated. So I don't like to see that. I would rather see someone who's maybe 2 or 4 or 5 pounds, a little bit heavier, and they're not doing as much aerobic training. And again, you can rev your engine up at a higher work rate if you're including even small segments of this, what I call a little bit higher output or higher intensity, by doing strength training and or implementing that in your workouts. You get a huge post-metabolic burn. In other words, you've revved your engine up, so you're burning calories post-exercise. And a lot of people that are trying to lose that little bit of fat, by doing that, you're going to be more economical. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Tom, but
you not only answered that question, you actually answered a later question. So that's perfect. And I will definitely say this: we've been doing for 8 years. We've been doing brick sessions, 30 sessions a year, every Wednesday from, say, March to October at the Rose Bowl, which is a great venue. And we'll do, different workouts, but maybe it's a 3-mile bike and a half a mile run. And by the middle of the summer, if we do bike run, just to practice transitions and get the brick feeling in folks' legs, they start to adapt to it. As soon as we start throwing in bike, plank or bike, lunge or star jump run, many of the athletes fall apart. It's pretty comical because, as you said, they're straight line athletes, and as soon as we start attacking their core, they're done.
Yeah, no, that's great. You're doing that. I mean, the short little segments sound ideal, and adding that component to it while other people are looking on, and then seeing whether or not their ability to sustain their output as they get a little fatigued. You're probably seeing a pretty dramatic fall off, and a lot of the athletes, even the very best ones. I was very fortunate to advise Craig Alexander and coach Chrissy Wellington, full time. And I had Julie Dibbins at one time and Rachel Joyce, and, not to throw out big names, but I learned by these athletes. My point in pointing them out is, both Craig and Chrissy were very asymmetrical. They had one dominant side, still do to this day to some degree. And, their glutes on their left side are very, very weak. And, I could show them some simple exercises. We'll fire that glute and put your hand on it. And it was like a bowl of butter. And I said, wow, you're a pretty good athlete, but feel that glute. It's just it's like a jellyfish. So, being great athletes, that comment didn't resonate very well with them. They said, all right, I'm going to listen to what you're going to say, and I'm going to make that other glute as equal to the opposite side. And they both did. So, I think even when we look at the best athletes, we find a lot of issues with balance and stability, and we can talk about the core. The core really is stabilizing your spine, but it allows you to generate power out of your glutes and really that whole kinetic chain up and down to your feet, to your shoulders. So core training, yes, is big, and I think you need to look very closely at the exercises. So you're not just doing the major muscle exercise, and I like a lot of them. I like a lot of the Olympic lifts, but a lot of the triathletes need to start with a real basic rudimentary ones just to get the fire.
So if I have two glutes that are made of butter, is that better than just one glute made of butter?
Well, you're a bad case, Tom.
I mean, I'm at least balanced, right?
Yeah, dreadfully balanced. I mean, there's some simple little exercises, and people say, well, what's a glute exercise? And, you can Google this and you can see 1,000 different permutations. And this is not necessarily the best one, but you get great EMG activity in the glute. You get good muscle firing pattern by doing a supine bridge. So it's just like, you're doing a bent knee sit up, but there's a lot of nuances to doing this properly. And I'm just going to tell your listeners, because I think everyone should try this. You have a bent knee, you're lying on your back, your arms are at a T, palms are up. You have to look at the spacing of your feet, and they should be about 2 inches apart, similar to what you would be doing when you're running. And you have to look at your knees and keep your knees same distance, roughly 1.5 to 2 inches apart. As you press up, and I'm pretty graphic, you want to squeeze your crack first. And as you push up with your pelvis, you want to bring the pressure on the medial side of your foot. So on the inside of your foot, about 90% of the people will push out towards their little toe. Their knees will flare out, their rectus femoris, their quad, and their IT band, and the peroneals on the lower leg will start to fire. And that's what happens when they run. They're on that lateral side, but their glute and their vastus medialis, oblique, the muscle on the inside of the knee, that one doesn't want to fire. If they keep the pressure on the inside of the foot, they'll feel that on their glute, and that glute will start to sting. So they come all the way up, bring their pelvis up, keep the knees together, pressure on the inside, lower themselves down. And as they get stronger, they can just lift one foot off the ground and see if they can attain the same height as they did on a double. So they can do 6 to 12 reps of a double, and then try 4 or 5 on a single, and see if they can stay up. And they'll generally find that they've got one side that sags. It's pretty easy. And you can also just take your hand and put your hand on your glute and say, wow, am I firing this? So that's a quick cue on it.
We'll find, hopefully we'll find a video, but that is great advice. And thank you. In terms of one of the things that is, I guess, beginner triathletes, to kind of talk about nutrition, if you're out doing a sprint, my opinion is if you're going to do maybe an hour of racing, nutrition isn't really as relevant. But as you get longer distances, and obviously into long course, it's the whole game. Would you, I mean, this is a longer conversation, but would you talk a little bit about approach to nutrition? We have a lot of athletes who experience cramping, GI issues. Their calves are cramping. They can't fire anymore. They can't put food down anymore. What's some of the advice that you have in general terms? I mean, it's such a big category in terms of race day nutrition, and also how to prepare for, when you're training, how do you consume so that you're ready for race day?
Wow, I mean, this is a massive topic, and I'll just touch on it because we need to do another podcast on the whole topic of nutrition. I'll first say that I take great pride in trying to understand all the science on my backgrounds in physiology. So I think, I'm ahead of the game. And for years and years and years, like a lot of folks that really have a national, international published reputation, we kind of looked at one facet. And the facet is that we know carbohydrates work well, but we didn't really look at fat adaptation and oxidizing fats and increasing the amount of healthy fats that we're eating as opposed to increasing our carbohydrates. The carbohydrates have an inflammatory response. And so, Tom, what you're talking about, where people have a lot of GI distress, is that a lot of times they put this bolus of different carbohydrates, whether it's fluid replacement drink and gels and gummy bears and waffles and everything else that we have on the market. And sort of the same mantra as I was talking about with training, more is not better. And a lot of them will think, gee, I've got a long race, so therefore I've got to eat a lot and I've got to really stuff the calories down. So I'm going to make this kind of simple on just my advice for this podcast. First off, more is not better. And I have some steadfast rules in racing. Don't change your diet. That's number one from what you've done. Also look at like workouts and like intensity, and what are you actually drinking and consuming. Almost 80% to 90% of the people that I speak to will always take in more on race day. And I say, why? And usually I'm talking to someone because they have GI distress. So why do you do that? I think it's a nervousness that people have. Quite often less is better because we have a lot of stored calories in muscle, liver glycogen, free fatty acids, whether you're carbohydrate adapted or not. If you're not taking as much, you're going to start accessing free fatty acids. And assuming that you're metabolically starting to shift oxidized fats a little bit more, the last thing you want to do is stuff in carbohydrates every 5 minutes. So that's where a lot of people, get in trouble, is they set themselves up. The second thing is that we don't need to load up on electrolytes nor water the day before the race or the morning of the race. And I've said this before, we're not camels. We can't store an infinite amount of electrolytes. That throws off our salt potassium pump on the inside, the outside of the cell, and throws off magnesium as well. We have a tendency, if we're carb adapted, to retain a lot of water, which makes you feel real puffy and stiff, and you want to release some of that water. So I gave a lot of advice. Eat those carbohydrates. Be careful, as I just advised everyone of this with my tone, but I didn't really talk about eating a higher healthy fat. And there's compelling evidence for a long, long time. It's not pseudoscience. I have a huge list. I talk about it at my Four Seasons camps in great detail, and I talk about it on my website. And I've been lambasted along with a lot of other people, and rightfully so. But I think if we have a closed mind to good science out there, and there are some scientists that Jeff Volek and Steve Finney and Dom D'Agostino, those are three that I follow among many. And if your readers would like a list, I can share this or send it to you, Tom, and you can post it. I also have books and references that I'd be glad to share with your listeners. I think would be helpful. So the other rule I have in racing is when you get out of T1, don't stop at the buffet table there. Keep going. Even though you burn calories on the swim, you want to get out on the bike and allow your body to reach equilibrium. And equilibriums allow your heart rate to come up to the workload, allow your breathing rate to come up, allow yourself to lose some of those stored water that you have. That's a good thing. And then it's sort of a steadfast rule. And obviously it depends on the size of an individual, their training background, the environmental conditions outside. But 15 to 20 minutes into the bike, that's when you start introducing possibly the fluid replacement drink or a little bit of water. So, I've always whittled people's total caloric intake down. If they're becoming more fat adapted and they're oxidizing fat, and they're actually producing ketone bodies, the fat oxidation rates are quite high. And I will mention this. If you have GI distress, you should do it for healthy reasons first. Performance-wise, it's very, very effective, and you'll be taking in about 50 to 80% less calories if you're fat adapted as opposed to what you're doing when you're carb adapted. And again, the carbs have created this GI mess that a lot of athletes have. And we really want to try to cut that back. First off, before you think, gee, I'm not going to listen to Dave Scott and do this healthy fat thing. Well, all right, listen to one thing, cut back.
That's great advice. And,
you might feel better.
Our team, as of this year, our team is working, is going to be using Myoplex from EAS, manufactured by Abbott, $1 billion company. We're relatively new to Myoplex, but you're no stranger to it. Can you tell us why you got involved with Myoplex and why that product in particular is better than other products that you've seen out on course?
I think they were willing to listen, not necessarily to the mandate that I was laying down, but they have internal people that were kind of looking at the efficacy of their products and saying, we really want to also cater to the endurance athlete as well. And is the marketplace saturated with the proper products, or can we introduce something that's better? And I think collectively, I have had some input, and they have great personnel, and so they have this Myoplex line with some great products. They're not putting a lot of the additives in it. They're using stevia as the sweetener in there. One of the products that I really like is the one called Hydrate, and they have a nice balance between sodium and potassium, again, on the inside and the outside of the cell, and that has to be modulated. So they've, kind of looked at research and making sure that they've included this. The amount of carbohydrate in Hydrate is very, very low. So per my comments before, people are having an issue. They still are getting some carbohydrate, but at a very small amount, much, much, much less than a gel or fluid replacement drink by volume. They also have a product called Recover, and a lot of good data on the branched chain amino acids. One's called L-leucine, and the byproduct of leucine, basically in a concentrated form, and a simplified abbreviation is called HMB, and HMB is added in this recovery product. So it enhances protein synthesis, which is a real plus. Simple language allows you to recover faster, hence the name. The first product that they had is a keto powder. So if you're hedging towards nutritional ketosis, where you are going to higher healthy fat in your daily diet, and that's about 70% of your daily diet is higher healthy fat, very low carbohydrate or net carb. That doesn't mean no carbs, because you can eat. I have this enormous list, and be glad to share it with you, of food lists of carbohydrates that are very good carbs because they have a higher fiber content. So think of all the green ones. Most of the green ones are pretty darn good for you. This particular product, the keto powder with Myoplex, they've positioned it, and they'd probably slap my hand for saying this, but I think it's a great product actually for the athlete while they're training and racing, if they've made this keto adaptation, because it parallels what their intake should be. The volume amount of it, again, when you're racing, as I said, will be a lot less. So you put this in your water bottle and off you go, and you could add Hydrate as well during your training session. So, I think they've got some good lines. We're looking at a few other products, which I can't unveil right now, but hopefully we're going to be able to complement the athlete that is interested in oxidizing fats and also being a little bit healthier and not living on carbohydrates.
Yeah, we had started talking to them 3-4 years ago, and they probably weren't ready for, retail in terms of, having, single servings and getting the product out and all that good stuff. And it seems like they've really figured that out. I get questions all the time from our athletes that said, well, I want to train with what's on course. And I always say, well, you better make sure whatever's on course works for you. Otherwise, you better bring something else in. And one of the comments that stuck to me was we'd have an athlete that say, well, this is what's, brand X is on course. So, race wouldn't put that on course unless it was good for me. And I would say, well, on that same course, you're going to find Red Bull. And I would never recommend Red Bull for any athlete. Just because somebody wrote a check doesn't necessarily mean that that's a product that you should consume or that it's good for you.
Yeah. And that parallels a lot of the research too that's done. Is the pharmaceutical companies, the seed companies have a lot of money, and so a lot of the information that is disseminated out to all of us and therefore the carbohydrates are what you should be taking in. And that's been sort of perpetuated by this big money wheel. And, I think, again, when athletes are making this shift in their diet, they're not going to have to carry as much. They're not going to be consuming as much, and they're going to be efficient through the whole race. So I've experimented well before I was with the EAS on, what I can take in and not in a carbohydrate form. Can I make a nut butter and that works fairly well. I actually have nut butter on a daily basis, and I have a lot of nuts too. But you put macadamia, almond, walnuts, coconut oil, and you can pulverize that. You don't have to be a chef and allow yourself to create these concoctions, but they work pretty well while you're exercising. Again, if you're fat adapted, and you just nibble on these. So I make these little nut balls, put them in a foil, and then put them like in a bento box, and then you have them on your bike. So I think there's ways. EAS is obviously looking at how we can mass produce these and make them pretty simple for the consumer. But I think there are other easy ways for the athlete to make this adaptation.
Well, I'm going to shift because I know your time is valuable. I wanted to shift and ask you a question about racing in 1994. You were 40. I think it was an 8:24 time at 40, and from what I've heard, that was one of the races you were most proud of. Do you have a couple minutes just to talk about that race in 94?
Sure. I got plenty of time, Tom. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was for me, it was a 5-year hiatus from racing Ironman and race Mark in the 89 race. And my two boys were born during that time block. Ryan, 89, he was actually there in the 89 race, and then Drew in 1990. And I was kind of preoccupied with that and also wrestling with some injuries, but I still had this nagging desire to go back again. And actually Dave McGilvery, a close friend and director of the Boston Marathon, and also Ironman athlete, said, "You got to do this, Dave. I know you're quietly thinking about it." So late 38 years old, he said, "Why don't you do it when you're 40?" And that's all I needed. So I came back when I was 40, and it was a fun day. Was it the best day? No, that darn Aussie Greg Welch beat me, but all I could see were those really low hanging swim shorts that I said, well, those are the most ill-fitting things. And he was about 20 seconds ahead of me for most of the time on the run. And I felt good, got it down to about 11 seconds in the energy lab. And then I just kind of ran out of gas. And coming back up, and, when I think about that race, I said, wow, that just gave him the psychological seed that sent him to the moon. And he was floating the last 6+ miles coming in. But yeah, it was a great day for me. It was a fun day. And I went into it with a kind of a quiet confidence, but I hadn't raced for 5 years. So, I didn't really know where I actually stood. I knew my fitness had come up as I was preparing through the summer, and I just felt like, boy, I'm getting stronger and stronger. I wish I had another month because everything was a green light. So on race day, I kind of had an open-ended slate. Like I'm going to do well, but I don't know how well. And, it turned out pretty good.
You had mentioned that, when you're talking about the kids and that 5-year break, I will tell you, every time that I race long course, there's definitely a point during the run that, I'm thinking about something that gets me, emotional. And I allow myself about, a minute, 30 seconds to think about it. I'm like, wait a second, I don't have time for this. I got to really focus it on the race. What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about when you're racing during those times?
I think that's okay, Tom. I think it's, your mind wanders generally on sometimes some funny things, simple items. You may see something on the course, which I did when I've raced. I was actually, I'd see one of the hula dancers or something on the course. I think, well, that's great. Or I'd see a family or, something that would just kind of catch my eye and obviously bring it back to maybe home. But I think when people are just concentrating on their form and the yellow line that's on the road, I think that's a mistake. And at the same time, when you have this discomfort, you can't run away from it. And I think people say, well, I'm going to disassociate myself from that discomfort. And I said, that's baloney. That it doesn't work that way. And everyone goes through a race, and in '94 that you were talking about, all the races that I did well in or was able to win. I had real bad patches in all of those races, and you just kind of bring it down to a small little sphere where you say, gee, I just got to think about my breathing. I'll relax. I may have a flowing or fleeting thought about my kids at the time. But I'm only going to get to that tree that's up ahead. It's 200 yards away, and I'm going to smooth it out. I'm going to calm myself down and get back in my rhythm. But I'm allowing these quick thoughts to kind of flow in and out. And once you get to that tree, you think, okay, I feel better. And then you look ahead, and all of a sudden, that tree might have been an eighth of a mile. Now you're looking at half a mile ahead. And of course, the best feeling is when you're kind of in that rhythm where the miles or kilometers just tick by, and all of a sudden you're well ahead of your game. You say, gee, what happened? I feel great. And I'm already 3/4 of the way through the event.
That's exactly right. And I will tell you, I look back at some of my favorite, memories. Hopefully there's many memories to come, but one of my favorite memories is, my daughter's at the side of the road, and I'm not winning an Olympic gold medal. I'm not winning the race. And, you stop and you take that picture with your, at the time, I think, 9-year-old, 10-year-old. And I can tell you, every time that thing comes up on my screen, the picture comes up on the screen, I'm not unhappy that I stopped that day and took a picture with my 10-year-old.
Probably not. It probably knocked off a lot of minutes on your race. Yeah, I had the same moment when my first one was born. And this was '89. I was racing Mark, and we were on Leeds Drive. And my wife at the time, I said, could you bring out Ryan? I guess I'd like to see her as well, but I was really interested in my son. And so she comes out, and Mark and I are moving along at a pretty good clip. We're running 6-minute pace along Leeds Drive, or slightly faster. And she comes out with Ryan, and her name is Anna. Anna's athletic, and she's got Ryan in her arms, and she's kind of running side by side next to us, and Ryan's head's like a bobble doll. It's going all over the place. And I think, well, that's not a good idea. But it sure energized me. I thought, wow, this is awesome. Keep running with me. And Mark and I didn't really talk about that race for about 10 years, but he did mention that moment. He said, boy, you really picked up the pace. And I was unaware of it, but I'm sure I did.
Oh, that's great. Well, in terms of, to think about Kona, I look back and it's 1982. You had to race twice in a year, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, they shifted the event that year.
Yeah, so having to train, at that level twice in 1 year, how was that different than, say, the other years that you raced, or was it no big deal? It was just another race.
I don't think it was a big deal. I think we were, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, we were overjoyed now that it was going to be in the warmer part of the year, not January, as I did my first race in 1980. So, to me, it was just another opportunity to race. And I had come into it was actually February of '82, the first race, and didn't run for 6 weeks until I got on the plane a week before the race, and that was the first time in 6 weeks. So I was a little bit lame going into that February race, and now I had a chance for redemption, 9 months later. And I don't think we thought twice about it. The athletes that were repeating. Later on, there was an Ironman series, and of course, a lot of my competitors, including Scott Tinley, said, "Oh boy, we get to do 4 or 5 Ironman a year." And I thought, well, this is a bit excessive. And I said, go ahead and do that. Come October, you're going to be shattered. And that was kind of the case. That again, it was way too much. But 2 in 1 year, I think is. And having the space, and it wasn't an issue. It is, I think, an issue in today's time where athletes are chasing the points and have to, and they're really relegated or obligated to race when they're not ready to race, and the potential for an injury is heightened, and I think it's a mistake. And I wish the qualifying standards, the criteria was a little bit different. I don't have the answer on it, but I certainly don't think a world champion needs to validate that they're a world champion by doing another Ironman race. I think that it potentially just lowers the ability level or potential ability level come October when you want everyone to race at their peak.
Well, that actually brings us to a question from Mark Keskis, who's in Michigan, up there in the Mitten State, as he likes to call it. He asks, what trend in triathlon would you like to see go away?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. I think certainly here in the States, it's become kind of an elitist sport because it's so cost prohibitive. And is it a liability issue that we're having to pay extraordinary fees, or is it because the race director and everyone else has to, get road closures and pay the city or whatever? I don't really know the economics of it, but what I do know is the bottom line is pretty darn expensive. And I think when people look at the outside to travel to an event and buy the super duper equipment, pay the entry fee, wow, it's a lofty ticket. That's hard. And you go to other countries, for example, Australia, some of the European countries, where they have club programs, and similar to what you're doing, Tom, is they're able to do these kind of mini events, which I think really satiate and fulfill, some of the desire and the passion that people have, but it gives them the opportunity. And conversely, I'd like to see it where, you have a major event that somehow is manageable financially for people to attend. And again, I'm sure people on the outside that are hearing this are saying, Dave Scott, you have no idea about the economics of putting on an event. Well, I have a little bit of insight, and I know they are very costly. So I guess if I could change that, I'd love to wave my magic wand.
Well, considering our mission statement is something about affordable, accessible, and sustainable, I'm definitely sitting there with a big spoon eating that up. We actually have a race. We started 3 years ago. It'll be our 4th year this year. We did it sort of as a can we do it type of initiative in Los Angeles. It's called Trick or Try. It's in October the 27th for, I'm pretty sure I can get you a comp entry.
Thank you, Tom.
And it's, we start off and the pricing is $50 for a sprint and $75 for an Olympic and $100 for a 70.3. And it's in Los Angeles. It's on a closed course, and Miller Coors provides a beer garden afterwards. And then every month from March all the way until October, we do a 3-hour clinic and get new people in the water and on the bike and the run. And, things like, our relay is $75 and, the Olympics $75 for an individual and the relay is $75 for an individual. So when I go back and I say, think about that Olympic relay, that's, 3 medals, 3 bibs, 3 shirts, with the beer garden, 6 beers, and a USAT certified closed course race. Los Angeles definitely has a solution for racing. And there's other races out there like that make it, affordable and accessible. I saw some data from USAT, which was, I think about $140,000 is the average household income, which is double that of the national household income. And I think I saw some data from WTC, and their average household income was $247,000, which is top 2%. And so when folks, we had Rocky Harris on our first show, and Rocky is great. And he's doing the My Time to Try initiative. Our experience is that people are leaving the sport due to 2 things, and that's cost and it's due to time. And so that's really what we try to tackle.
Yeah, it's great. Well, it's awesome you're able to put those on. And your fee is, golden light for modeling, other events in other cities and other states. I hope people can kind of look at what you're doing and replicate it.
And Dave, we just as a point, it's sold out. We had 825 participants, and we'll have over 1,000 this year. And anyway, but that was it. One other thing you actually mentioned You actually mentioned when the swim, I was at ITU Leeds last year in June, and I actually had a family vacation, and just so happens we were over there at the same time. My wife doesn't believe that, but that's the truth. And I said, hey, let's go to Leeds and do this race. And I didn't want to lug around a wetsuit for 2 weeks because, I limited packing. I showed up to this race thinking, I'll just grit it out for 30 minutes. It'll be okay.
Ooh.
And unfortunately, I think actually fortunately, they said at packet pickup, they're like, no, wetsuits required.
Good.
And by that way, that race was incredibly affordable. I think it was like 80 pounds or something like that. It was amazing. And so I started scrambling for a wetsuit, and I found HUUB wetsuit there. I found Ellie Jackson, who's Dean Jackson's daughter, at the expo, and I walked up and said, can you rent, borrow, beg, steal a wetsuit? And they gave me a wetsuit. It's the first time I had tried a HUUB wetsuit was last June. And I wanted to be competitive with the Brownlee brothers. So, I
there you are.
I only wanted the best. I put the wetsuit on, I swam, I liked the bike more. I got into transition. I took off the wetsuit, and as I'm taking it off, it just falls off. I didn't have to wrestle it. For the first time I had ever tried a wetsuit, didn't have to wrestle it. And I said in my head, that'll be, I'll be using HUUB wetsuits, I think, for the rest of my life if they keep making it like this. Now they are now a sponsor of our team. And I know that you have a connection with them. Again, it's one of those things where you've had a long time connection with them. Can you tell us a little bit about why you are so strongly associated with HUUB?
Well, I didn't know anything about him at the time, and HUUB is actually a real guy, and his expertise is in fluid dynamics, so one area, but they've looked at how the flow is with the water and the athlete in the water and the buoyancy of the athlete and the buoyancy of the product. So they've kind of looked at it from a real scientific and technological arena to say, we can change the paneling on this, or we can alter it. So not to sound too gobbledygook or too promotional sounded, I think they started out with the wetsuits, and they had a pretty provocative line that was very functional and efficient. As you said, it just slides right off your ankles. From there, we started a Dave Scott line. So I have a little line with HUUB, and we kind of said we want to have all the bells and whistles. We want to make sure that we're not leaving anything out. And so the Dave Scott Tri suit has been number one over there. It's kind of won all the awards in the last couple of years, and it's a great functional and fitting suit. And I like giving input on it, and kind of tweak it every year. And so there's different SKUs around that in the Dave Scott line, which I'm pretty happy about. And we have it here in the States, which is a cool thing. It took us a while to get it here, but it's moving around the country now. Well, we appreciate it. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for on behalf of the 4,300 people of California Triathlon, and at least maybe now it'll be 36 people that actually listen to this podcast. Thank you so much, and we will make sure to get a couple of the 23-ounce California Triathlon suit mugs out to you and Susan, your assistant, so that you will be able to enjoy some soup goodness over your season.